Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi p21010btlvnm 18-volt brushless blower. Ryobi really needs to rethink their naming schemes here. Okay, starting off at the rear of the tool, we have the 18-volt battery slot, which will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries. Overall, the slot works and is functional, although it's a little bit looser than I personally would have liked to have seen. I don't think there's any danger of the battery falling out. I couldn't get it to fall out without pushing in the two clips, but at the same time, it would have been nice to have a little bit more sturdy battery slot. So it gets a pass, but just barely. And directly below the battery slot we have the air intake. The air intake seems to be well designed, and the design seems to be perfectly functional. I haven't had any issues with loose clothing getting sucked in or blocking the air intake, so overall it gets a pass here. And next up we have the grip. The grip is nice and large, and it has a nice rubberized texture which will prevent your hand from slipping. So overall it's a perfectly functional grip. I don't really have any complaints about the grip, so it gets a pass. And next up we have the trigger. Now I would love to say that I like the trigger on this particular blower, but I can't really say that. Overall, the trigger is kind of sticky. There's a little bit of a bump there. It's hard to get to the low speeds. I don't know. It's just not a very well-designed trigger, and it doesn't feel very sturdy, to be honest. So I'm not a huge fan of the trigger on this particular blower, and it doesn't really feel like the kind of trigger that you should be getting for the price you're going to be paying for this blower. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to say the trigger does not get a pass on this blower. And next up we have the turbo button. Now, I'm not a fan of these turbo buttons, and I'll explain why here. I really think this is more of a marketing gimmick than anything else, and I really would prefer having the speed integrated in with the variable speed trigger. It would be easier to operate, and quite frankly, it would reduce a point of failure. I really think this is nothing more than just a hype or a way to claim that you have this extra power for marketing. But in reality, it's not a good feature. It's a failure point, and I really can't recommend it. The turbo button on this particular blower is already starting to fail after about 8 months of use. So this does not get a pass, and I really think Ryobi needs to rethink their design here. So yeah, moving on. And next up we have the blower tube latch. Now the blower tube latch locks into position once you insert the tube onto the body of the blower, and it seems to be perfectly functional, or at least it seems to be. I'll explain why I can't give you a definitive answer here in a second. And next up we have the blower tube. Now the blower tube is fairly long, and I don't really have any complaints about the length of the tube itself. I do not like the fact that you cannot attach any sort of additional tubes in order to make it longer, and my biggest complaint, and what I kind of hinted at in the previous segment, was the fact that, well, I can't really remove the blower tube because of, well, it's kind of stuck on there. I'm not sure why it won't remove. I think that maybe the molding on the blower tube might have been mismolded, maybe, but it's on there and I can't get it off. I think if I really tried, I might be able to get it off, but if you're looking for a quick and easy removable blower tube, so for transporting or for storage, well, this probably isn't going to be the best option for you. So yeah, moving on. Okay, moving on to the noise level of this blower. Overall, this blower is part of Ryobi's Whisper series, and it does a fairly good job at being quiet. Well, as long as you don't engage turbo. Once you engage turbo, you're going to have a hard time keeping quiet if you're going to be blowing out your garage or deck at 3 a.m. in the morning. So quite frankly, it's not really that quiet of a blower if you're going to be using turbo. Now, can you use this blower effectively without turbo? Yes, if it's lightweight debris, small dust and dirt and leaves, maybe, if it's not wet leaves. But overall, if you're going to start dealing with larger or heavier size debris, you're going to need that turbo. And even with the turbo, it still doesn't really supply all the power you're going to need for certain situations. So it's a decent performance, I guess. But you still are feeling like it's lacking something in its overall performance when it comes to blowing out larger and heavier debris. So yeah, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of this particular blower for several different reasons. Now, for a long time, this actually was about the best 18-volt Ryobi blower you could buy, because quite frankly, all their other 18-volt blowers are way less powerful. Now, there are some newer Ryobi blowers that have been announced and released that are definitely looking like that they're going to be way superior to this particular blower. So, is this blower worth getting? I'm going to say probably not, but we'll go through the pros and cons here real quick, and we'll discuss some of the reasons why I just can't really recommend this particular blower. And the first pro is 18 volts. Overall, because this is an 18 volt blower, you're able to adapt batteries over from other battery platforms such as DeWalt and Milwaukee via a third-party adapter fairly easily, as long as you're able to find that third-party adapter, and so I would definitely consider that to be a pro. Long tube. Overall, the tube on this particular blower is fairly long, and it definitely will help in a lot of situations, so I would consider this to be a slight pro. Rubberized grip. Overall, the rubberized grip is nice and large, and overall provides a nice, firm, and easy to grip area. It's good for if you're wearing gloves or bare hands, so it gets a pass here. Low speeds. Overall, this blower does have some good low speeds. Unfortunately, those low speeds are rather hard to activate simply because of how crappy the trigger is on this particular blower. So it's good that it has low speeds, but they're hard to activate, so it gets a slight pass and it's a slight pro. And first on the list, we have the stuck tube. Now, I'm not sure if this is an issue with my particular blower or if all these particular blowers have this, so that's why it's not on the cons list and not on the pros list, obviously. But my particular blower has a tube that I can't get off, and so I would definitely consider that to be an issue, although I think it could just be my particular blower. So yeah, moving on. And the first con is the trigger. The trigger on this particular blower is not a good trigger. It is a variable speed trigger, but it's so crappy and so hard to get in between the different speeds, and there's no definition in between the different speeds, that it just is not a good trigger. And quite frankly, it's just crap. I'm sorry, but Ryobi really should have spent a little bit more money on the trigger on this particular blower. I had a cheaper Ryobi blower that had a better trigger on it, so I'm not really sure why this more expensive Ryobi blower has a crappier trigger. So yeah, it's just, it has a crappy trigger. So moving on. And next up in the con list, we have price. This blower is priced at $139, and well, quite frankly, that's way too much money for this particular blower. If this blower had been priced closer to the $100 mark, it might be somewhat recommendable, but because of the prices, this is not a recommendable blower, and I really would suggest you look at either a newer version of this blower or maybe something from another brand and look at some battery adapters. I just don't think this particular blower is worth the price that they're asking for it. So moving on. And next up, we have power on the cons list. Now, the power on this particular blower, when you're using turbo, probably is about 410 CFMs at 110 miles per hour. The problem is that when you're not using turbo mode, well, that power level drastically drops. And when I mean drastically, I mean it probably about by half. And quite frankly, this just is not that impressive of a blower when you're not using turbo mode, and the turbo mode button is finicky, and so quite frankly, I'm just not impressed with the power levels of this blower, especially at the price that they're asking for it. So overall, this is definitely a con in my opinion. I've mentioned it multiple times now, but the turbo on this particular blower is finicky, and quite frankly, I don't like the button, and I really think Ryobi needs to integrate this into the trigger. The turbo button needs to go away, and that's just the way it needs to be. It's a point of failure, and I don't think that people should be actively looking at this particular blower simply because of the turbo button. So yeah, this is definitely a major con. And final thoughts on this particular blower. You know, this is a fairly lightweight blower, weighing about 7 pounds with a 4 amp hour battery. It has fairly decent specs. The problem is that those specs don't necessarily reflect what it's like using the blower. In order to get those specs that you see online, the 410 CFMs and the 110 mile an hour speeds, you have to use the turbo button, and the turbo button will fail you eventually. At the end of the day, this is not that great of a blower, and I think there's far better options on the market, and I really think that looking at some of Ryobi's newer blowers or something in the 40 volt system, or even another brand, would probably be preferable. I don't really like this blower, and I really don't think it's all that impressive, so I really can't recommend this particular blower. And that's it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.